Hi, everybody. Good evening, and thanks for joining us here this evening on this platform for the online launch of Amanda Bell's Riptide and David Butler's Liffey Sequence. We have got a four-way link up. We are linking up with Dublin, with David, with Amanda and Maurice in Dublin, with David down in Kerry, and with Eleanor in Tipperary, and with myself here in Connemara. And we're very, very happy to have Maurice and Eleanor doing the honours here to introduce and launch the new collections. These are our second collections with both of these poets, so obviously we hold them in very high esteem. And we are going to start off with Amanda's Riptide. Here we have the cover with the wonderful artwork from Donald Teskey. And fortunately for us, we, as I say, have got Eleanor Hooker, Maurice Devitt, to do the honours. Hi, Maurice.
Hi, John. How's it going?
Very well, very well. And yourself?
Great. Yeah, great. Really looking forward to this now.
Good. Is it raining over there also?
No, it's not too bad now. It's actually getting quite dark, though.
Okay.
Winter is coming in. I think today, I'd say today now, I was actually out walking today in Howth, and it was gorgeous, but it kind of felt like it was nearly the last day of summer or something, you know, so.
Certainly autumn here. Maurice, something I wanted to ask you, is there much real life interaction in the poetry scene in Dublin yet?
Not a whole lot, no.
No,
really,
okay.
No. Still an awful lot of it is online, you know.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Maurice, I'm going to hand over to you, and I'll hide behind the scenes, and thank you very much once again. Take it away.
Great stuff, John. Thanks very much. Good evening, all, and welcome to the launch of Riptide, Amanda Bell's sumptuous new collection. It's a real honor for me to be asked to launch the collection because I've been a great friend and admirer of Amanda's work since we met. We met actually on the Poetry Studies Masters at Mater Day in 2011. We're both members of Hibernian Writers, so I've had the joy to see, experiencing firsthand the constant development of Amanda's work over the last 10 years. And Riptide, I think, is thematically very consistent with her previous collections, but I think the poetry is bolder and asks more questions of the reader. Amanda is something of a magpie mind. She's interested in and inquisitive about everything. She seeks to better understand every aspect of our world, no matter how small, and our pivotal role in it. How we are influenced by and respond to nature, art, travel, and climate change. The dark history of the woman's role in the family and society and how this must change. And right up to date, the COVID pandemic and what it has taught us about ourselves. But essentially, I think these poems are a celebration of beauty, a beauty often shadowed by loss. And this juxtaposition, it comes across immediately from the powerful Plagia 2 by Donald Teskey on the front cover. Reinforced by the title itself, Riptide, I looked up the meaning and it said, defined as an extremely strong, unpredictable current that flows across another, may be hazardous to swimmers. And the collection plunges in, opening with the title poem and the story of a precious ring lost to strong currents, a ring that cannot be replaced. No new gold ring could bond that me, that you, those strangers lost to time. And so the agenda is set, and from there there's a sinuous flow as the poems arrive. At first dipping into the poets and our own ambivalent relationship with water and the sea, then broadening out to the ecology of the earth and our role in keeping it sustainable and safe. This is emphasizing coexistence, the first haibun in the collection, the body of which opens rather ominously with, "There is a huge spider in the kitchen. It lives in the recess of the skylight," and continues playfully and with some considerable detail on how to deal with it. In the same vein, there are few poets who would have the chutzpah to write a poem with the title "A Compost Bin in Rathmines," inspired by Derek Mahan's disused shed, and replacing mushrooms with brandling worms. Use it to deliver a treatise, both subtle and masterful, on our lives during lockdown and the fears we face going back into the world. They are begging in their wordless way to be left where they are, safe in the dark, an isolated tribe, lost to the world and happy to be so. And perhaps the most significant formal development in this collection is the increased presence of Japanese forms, most particularly in the shape of haibun, but also in the use of individual haiku, almost as circuit breakers through the book as an alternative to explicit section breaks, creating the sense of taking a breath without interrupting the seamless flow, while tangentially reinforcing key themes. More storms forecast. On a broken branch, green figs withering. The strong presence of haibun is both a reflection of the broadening focus of Amanda's writing and her ability to harvest the best of both. The haibun serving as a plush vehicle for Amanda's elegant prose style, but also acting as a more concentrated infill of key themes and messages. The heartbreaking grandfather's medals in memory of her grandfather George Bell opens with the succinct finality of, "He rarely speaks of his 2 years in the trenches. At 20, he has already put it behind him," and ends with, "When they come upon a flock of sheep torn apart by dogs, it all comes flooding back. The 3rd of September, 1939. My grandfather stays up all night weeping." The concise poem In the Chocolate Factory introduces a short series of poems interspersed through the center of the collection, which are inspired by the invitation to participate in the new Scream, an expedition around Oslo to see sites associated with the Norwegian artist Edvard Munch. They lead in reflecting Munch's Scream as a pervasive presence in the cold, sharp Oslo air. As in the poem, The Scream, you grasp the bars, lean towards the fjord, your howling swallowed by the fog. But the ethereal beauty is once again interrupted by loss, as the memory of a domestic terrorist attack in 2011 comes to the fore in the new Scream. The thread of Munch's influence is evident, both ekphrastically and emotionally, as Amanda's thoughts turn to art and travel, starting in her beloved North Mayo with Donald Teskey, Ballinglen, and stretching out to Lisbon and her Spanish idyll, Cadiz, where a consideration of the vigil of Our Lady of Ransom surfaces a complex lattice of memories and reflections on how formal religion and family often shaped the role a woman played in life. Funerals were not a family affair, and though 3 of my grandparents had died by the time I was 12, children did not attend. Interments were a male preserve. The poem Trinity considers the requirement to balance the different roles of daughter, mother, wife, each with their own solicitudes. This balance is writ large in the final third of the book, as Amanda's daughters, Elizabeth and Grace, to whom the collection is dedicated, take center stage. The relationship captured lovingly and a really touching series of poems, including My Daughter Drawing, Oh Bad, and My Daughter in the Washhouse, Taruda. The final poem in the collection, Curtains, dedicated to Amanda's mother, seems to capture the chain of family roles quite perfectly. And I forget to remember that summer's day of sowing on the lawn, a toddler pottering, me pregnant, you central to it all. Donald Teskey, in a recent interview on RTE's The Works, referred to the layers of meaning in his art. This is a collection richly imbued with such layers, hooks that will keep drawing you back to poetry that is remarkable in both its imagery and music. The truly cohesive work of a gifted poet who ensures the different themes and styles are seamlessly interwoven. This is a sparkling collection, and it is an honor and pleasure to declare it launched and to invite Amanda to read some poetry from the book.
Maurice, thank you. That was really beautiful. I was thrilled when you agreed to launch the collection, and thank you for giving it such a very thoughtful and
thank you.
Considered send-off. Really, your encouragement over the last decade has been a catalyst for me getting published, so I don't know that I would be here at all if we hadn't met on the MA.
Sorry, what?
So I'm going to start with a few thank yous. So first of all, to everyone who has joined us here tonight, it's really special to know that you're out there in this weird cyberspace. And thanks also for the very kind messages sent in during the week. A huge thanks to Lisa Frank and John Walsh of Doire Press for the great work they do on behalf of their writers, particularly in these very challenging times of online launches. And also to Maeve Richardson and Mark Walsh for all their work with the PR. And to the Arts Council of Ireland, the support of which has made a really significant contribution to the collection in the form of various bursaries. Thanks to Jane Clark for her very kind and astute mentoring, to Sean O'Connor and Maeve O'Sullivan for their support and their friendship and their very thoughtful reading of the manuscript, and also to Jane Robinson for her very meticulous reading. To all of the Hibernian writers and the Pepper Potts Highbun group, it's a privilege to share work with you. I'd like to thank Donald Teskey for the wonderful cover image and Trina Walsh for the beautiful book design. For their very generous blurbs, thanks to Geraldine Mitchell, Sean O'Connor and John O'Donnell. And for their support also, thank you to Martin Doyle, Sean Hewitt, Ruth McKee, Jerry Smith and Egbert Pitchfors. Last but not least, my husband Patrick and my daughters Elizabeth and Grace, who are the best people I can imagine spending a pandemic with, and who are also very sanguine about appearing in poems, which I appreciate. So it's a pleasure to share the launch tonight with David Butler, whose book I've enjoyed enormously, and also with Eleanor, whose new collection of Ochre Nash I'm looking forward to next month. So now I'm going to read some poems. Riptide. I lost it to strong currents. It slid over my cold knuckle and got swept away before it sank, though I stood chest high among tall waves while you dived and dived to save it. Every glint the sun hit seemed to strike its shape as ebjets carved the sand from underfoot till we had to cede it to the tide and leave, quite naked for its lack. No new gold ring could bond that me, that you, those strangers lost to time. The next poem is a request from my friend and fellow Hibernian, Mark Baker. the value of cut flowers. In mourning for the life I loved, I think about their gardens, my foremothers, women who knew the value of cut flowers. Women who, through wars, TB, and polio, knew how to make a cutting strike and when to slice a spade through tangled roots. I see their short-nailed fingers, their arthritis-blunted thumbs as they strip back leaf nodes of geraniums, nip side shoots from tomato plants, pinch out the first frail flowers to boost strong growth. They sieved their compost to find tilth, snapped deadheads from blown roses, and when a tray of seedlings failed, began again, because things can catch up. They knew that after every flush, the border must subside, so seeded annuals to fill the gaps. From January's snowdrops to Lenten roses in December, each month has its misfortunes, frost and infestation, gales that blast the apple buds, lay foxgloves flat, tear leaves from towering hollyhocks. This strange, dry spring, when nothing's right, I do my best to propagate, inspect my softwood cuttings for white threads of tiny roots, and try, without the proper grit, to make the most of what I've got, learn which plants will flourish, which survive. So as Maurice said, several of the poems here were inspired or responses to the work of Munch. And when I was invited to Oslo by Egbert Pidgefors, and one of the places we visited was the Munch spot overlooking Oslo Fjord, which is where allegedly Munch felt this great thrill of fear through nature. And the day we were there, it was extremely foggy. And at the Munch spot, there's a frame which was put there as part of an installation by the performance artist Marina Abramovich. And people are invited to hang on to the frame and scream down at the fjord. The scream. There will be no sunset, yet you trudge past grey-draped sculptures through packed snow. Clinging to the handrail, your city shoes like ice skates on the slope. From the viewing spot, through a black steel frame, the city floats below. You grasp the bars, lean towards the fjord, your howling swallowed by the fog. And the Indian poet and novelist Padma Sachdev was the first modern woman poet of the Dogri language. She died this year, aged 81. And this poem is a transcreation of one of hers. It's called Daring. No one drinks from the well to the right of our hill, though it brims with bright water. No one glances that way, since a calf drowned in its depths, deceived by drifting blossoms. Deep in its core, shadows yearn for their return, the girls with vessels. The water calls to me in daylight, implores me to imbibe it in full sight. At night, I bathe unseen in its darkness, cup its coolness in my palms and raise it to my mouth. My thirst is as insatiable as love. There are 10 haibun in the collection, and I'm going to read one of the shorter ones, Grandfather's Medals, in memory of George Bell. He rarely speaks of his 2 years in the trenches. At 20, he has already put it behind him. He comes home to work the land. He marries, rears a family. Later, his children hear snippets. How shrapnel destroyed a Christmas pudding. How a comrade lanced a bayonet at him for cutting his hair badly. He had got his own bayonet and rifle when he turned 18. An unopened box, 3 medals and a dog tag tarnish in the dark. He's a farm manager with a good eye for stock, judges sheep and cattle at shows. When he cups his hands to his mouth and lows, they amble over. Sometimes he walks the fields with his son. When they come upon a flock of sheep torn apart by dogs, it all comes flooding back. The 3rd of September, 1939. My grandfather stays up all night, weeping. So the book is dedicated to Elizabeth and Grace. So I'm going to read a poem for each of them. This one is for Grace. My daughter in the wash house, Taradant. In the public hammam, women meet to bathe, step out of their jalabas to reveal smooth-shaven skin where hennaed lines invest their hidden selves. We join them in the steam as we are bad, well slathered in black belty soap. But as your little fingers loose my hand, an attendant tugs your drawers off, starts to scrub you with a washcloth like she'd scour a crusted pot. I'm so enthralled, my solemn child, I fail to recognize your fright. And this one is for Elizabeth. Oh, bad. As we drive along the quays at dawn, a clean sun lightly strokes the domes, transforms the city to a hallmark card, all baby pinks and blues, white clouds scudding out to sea as eastbound geese inscribe the sky with their goodbyes. This is the hour the homeless own the empty streets. At traffic lights, a bearded icon supplicates, but I drive on, my wallet left at home. I must remember to avoid the tolls on my way back without you. Throat catching on diesel fumes, I watch you disappear into the ship beneath your rucksack carapace. How I envy you this barely broken day. Dublin Bay reflecting nacre. Everything you need in just one bag. And the last poem I'm going to read is the last poem of the collection for my mother. It's called Curtains. The windows were so tall, so wide, no floor was large enough to take the length of fabric. It was summer, and we stretched it right across the lawn to measure, cut, and baste its sky blue ground, splashed bright with coloured blooms. My first curtains, your umpteenth, so heavy and huge that when their colours glowed too bright for teenage tastes, and no one was around to help me haul them to the attic, it seemed easier to drop them to a thrift shop. I forget which one, and I forget to remember that summer's day of sewing on the lawn. A toddler pottering, me pregnant, you central to it all. I wish now they were up there, not in tidy pleats, but spread across each joist, tucking us in. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Amanda. That was wonderful. Lots of lovely comments there. Lots of people out there listening and enjoying it. That's great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're going to switch now to our second poet being launched, and that is David Butler with his collection Liffey Sequence, which is his second collection with us. The first one was All the Barbaric Glass. And here you see the artwork, which is from his brother, Jim Butler. And that's lovely to have the artwork from your brother. And we're going to hand over now to, we're going to invite Eleanor to come in. Hi, Eleanor. How are you doing? Hello, Eleanor. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Are you there?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah, great. Okay. So everything okay?
You can hear me. Will I start?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So you have your own.
I'll start, shall I?
Tell us a little bit about your new collection coming out. What's the title?
I'm sorry, John, I'm having a little bit of problems hearing you. Shall I start?
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Okay. It's a huge honor to be invited to launch David Butler's third collection of poetry, Liffey Sequence. David is a poet, author, and playwright, and as I said, Liffey Sequence is his third poetry collection. It's a collection in which his powerful observational skills guarantee that anything lost or overlooked in the world is restored. David is like an audiologist. He tests the sounds the earth makes and her creatures, man, bird, and beast, and her otherworldly creatures, spirit and spectre, and then provides us with exquisite poems that amplify the range and reach of his imaginings. In his poems, we hear and see the plaintive gull that inscribes morning with a call cursive and guttural, a goldfinch, airy musician in its yellow sleeves and red mask, as merry sweet as a spring morning. The homeless who return to the grayscale anxieties that prowl nocturnally. The river gods in their webbed skin, their breath of must and decay, their muscles quirky as eels. We see, but do not hear, our famine dead, silent, because were the dead to rise, they'd weigh no more than a shadow weighs, passing over the dry stone of the land. These are lines and phrases in David's poems that carry enough truth to be poems in themselves, and that's an incredible gift. The sequences in the collections have their own hue and heft to match each thread David is weaving. David's poem Heritage is the one I've returned to most often. This is a poem in correspondence with Kavanagh's Shankodaf, and not as a form of ventriloquism, but more as a philosophical extension of the questions Kavanagh posed in his poem, of the lonely plight of the poet who is proud to be different, and who sees beauty even in the barren landscape of his art, and who persists to make poems despite a cold indifference. David does write about doubt and the lack of certainty the poet's life presents. And I quote, "The poet's a man who feigns. He feigns so completely that he comes to pretend pain, for pain he actually feels." Readers are discerning and recognize authenticity and sincerity. It may be that the poet has less time on the page in which to convince as opposed to the fiction writers, and any writer who knows these anxieties will recognize them in the poems that David writes about. But the truth is, I read David Butler's Liffey Sequence with a deepening sense of awe and respect. Throughout the collection, poem to poem, single lines leap from the page, astonishing in their brilliance, unforgettable in their descriptive and lyrical command. The book reminds me of what poetry can be, wise, honed, abundant, and a pleasure to read and to reread. And so congratulations, David. This book is just an astonishing work of art. Congratulations to Lisa and John at Doire Press. They publish powerful books by some of the finest writers writing today. And in a collegiate spirit, extend a hand of friendship to all writers, myself included. And now I'm going to hand you over to David, who's down in Kerry, and he's going to read some of his beautiful work.
Thank you very much, Eleanor, for those wonderful words. Anyone who's heard me speak of poetry in the last 5 years will know the huge esteem I hold your poetry in your vivid imagination. So it's really special to hear those words from you, Eleanor. Thank you very much. I'd also obviously like to thank Lisa and John in Doire Press for, well, they're into their 11th year at the wheel of Doire Press at this stage, and they've really meant a lot to so many writers, so many poets, so many short storyists, and they really are a stalwart team. Thanks also to Trina Walsh, who came up with the wonderful book design, and the whole team there, and thanks to the Arts Council, without whom a lot of this would not be possible. I'd like to begin with what's arguably the biggest challenge that we're facing in the 21st century, an existential challenge, really, the whole issue of climate change. And again, I'll just point out that Doire Press brought out a very important publication, Empty House, directly responding to this crisis that we're facing. And I'm going to read a 4-part poem called Weather Gods, one part of which featured in Empty House. So, Weather Gods. Tired of burnings, bulldozers, charred lungs, Chak, the rain god, decamps from Mayan rainforests, rides the bloated trade winds, comes to reign over the old world. Days on end, the swollen earth has swallowed till it's soft as blotting paper. The sun is an aspirin dissolving in a gauze of soaked cotton. Storm drains clog, rivers turn reptilian, shed their alluvial taint in basements, swell to bursting, silver plate the floodplains. Chak moves over the face of the waters, looking on desolation wrought by man, calls up the brother elements. Part 2. The drunken wind which last night stomped through the playground drove the park into a frenzy of soughing boughs, buffeted the houses, sputtered down the throats of chimneys, chased cascades of startled leaves against the windows, has, this morning, taken a breather. The ground is littered with all the detritus of late autumn, as if a carnival has decamped, and the trees, stripped bare as parents when grief tears through them, are suddenly old. Part 3. There's a moment between drought and downpour when the winds hold their breath. The boughs stop moving. The cloud, backlit, is photograph still. The sea's meniscus reverent. A moment in suspense. An instant when future imperfect appears to hang in the balance, when the dice have yet to fall, the first fat drops to explode in the dust-tormented earth. And part 4 brings me back to Bray Head, which is my other residence. Weeks on, the scorched earth stench persists. Beyond the cowering heather, the rusted fern and bracken's burnt sienna, a blackened heath. Something else subsists beneath the ocean sibilance and gulls' psychotic squabbles, the absolute silence of death. Bitterness of ash, the whitened cans, the charred bones of gorse imploring like something from Purgatorio, a vision out of Aleppo, or a lesson from our own past, the whole head pitch-capped. This year is the 20th anniversary of my mother's death. She died in July 2001. And a very vivid memory I have of her just after her liver cancer was diagnosed. And she knew she had very little time to live, really. We brought the dog down to the Phoenix Park. We do this most weeks. It was October, and we got caught in a leaf storm. So this is entitled Leaf Storm, in memory of my mother. Some days after the diagnosis set time, a death watch beetle ticking, you set out undaunted for the park. Your time of year, air cold as water, the trees touched with fleeting majesty. As we rounded a beach copse, a puckish wind stirred up and, like Dante's fugitives, drove all about a streaming leaf storm, shoal dense and endless, brass upon brass, chattering, shearing in great murmurations, showing the raw grandeur in letting go. Just prior to the lockdown with COVID last March, my father died 20 years after my mother. He was 10 years older than her anyway. He had been suffering from dementia. But what I'd like to do is remember he was a Gaeilgeoir, an Irish speaker, very proud of that. So what I thought I would read is a couple of very short poems in Irish. My Irish wouldn't be that great. And I hope his ghost isn't cringing to hear me say these. I'll give the translation immediately after. Iovona an Irher. Eg trasnún an Sharona domer modern a hiskaf portig chodon na bior. Hogus chun chwimna gach torres de yening. Is na mohokona vasca di zonum galior. Eidocha spin onta streita. Huina an chrutig le kailiunt gajo. Klicha lecha in ignialta on morta. Is Jora day in a Manatica wayo. Images of the West. Crossing the Shannon this morning, its bog water brown as porter, I recalled every trip I'd made and the emotions they'd mix up in me. Sweet despair, desolate wonder, the lament of the curlew forever vanishing. Flagstone walls, a skeleton of the famine, and wild fuchsia like flags of Mayo. Fuchsia in Irish is Diora Day or Jorini Day, the tears of God, which I imagine come out every single GAA final when they just miss. We get the poor old Diora Day. Lasar Chuila. A Chioltor Erach, a Yamra Gel, I de Chote El Data Mar Carnaval, I de Wuncheli Bui is Daig Phil Yarik, Chomairach Bin na Modanarik. A ille fóin cá bhfuil the hour, fan agus aber de bhuan bua. Féach cho even is atá an lá, féach cho bhuan is atá an dúlra. Goldfinch. Airy musician, bright reveller in your coat, party-coloured like carnival, in your yellow sleeves and red mask as merry sweet as a spring morning. Wandering poet, what's your hurry? Stay and sing your victory chant. Look how delightful is the day. See how durable is nature. The book, it's entitled Liffey Sequence. In fact, it's bounded by two different sequences. The first sequence was an actual Percent Arts commission in 2017. And it was a sequence of 11 poems that followed the old atmospheric railway, which is now the Dart Line, between the Salt March at Booterstown and the 40-foot. And I'll just read Overture, which is the opening of that sequence. See it as the crow flies, or the plaintive gull that inscribes morning with a call, cursive and guttural, on a contour from the Salt Marsh to the 40-foot, high over twin filaments, along which green grubs caterpillar outward in by a sea of beaten metal. See it again as memory soars over towers driven like rivets to hold down the hem of the bay, over bandstand and pagoda, terraces, cloistered squares, to where harbour mandibles enfold the skittishness of metronomes. And I'll just read one other one from that sequence. This one is a memory of going out as kids to swim in Blackrock baths. And it's a remarkable sort of remnant still there sticking out into the sea, this sort of decaying white concrete. Blackrock baths. Memory persists, stubborn as a crustacean in the seawall's flank. Alluvial time caught in a sand trap by the myriad tide. Relict of childhood, calcified, pale as a daytime moon. It sounds a chamber ghosted with shrieks, echoes, a jostle of elbows. White bodies, a thin wind shivering the choppy surface. Froth in the corners, wind blown. Images distance has shivered. Once, a bearded man in the changing rooms, erect as an exclamation. and from the high dive once the gargantuan slap of a belly flop. And that's a belly flop that has echoed down the decades. I can still hear it now. I can still feel it now. The second sequence that closes is the Liffey Sequence, which follows the tide in and out along the Liffey. And again, I'll just read one or two to give a flavour of that. Liffey Boardwalk. This is a poem about seagulls, by the way. Liffey Boardwalk. Single file, they line the rail and eye the blow-ins, or ride a wave of falling air to scrap over a sodden crust. They're bickering old as Viking gutturals and the march of Cambro Normans. Seagulls are the first citizens of a town built on scraps, chain and manacle dug from tidal loam. Claymore, pike, English musketry, they've seen it all. Farther down, a drunken spat erupts over beer cans. And who's to say it hasn't all the bitterness of civil war? The gulls are unmoved. The wind shifts. The tide changes. This poem, River Gods, I dedicated to my sister in that it was one of her favourite poems. Anyway, she died of cancer back 5 years ago, so I'll dedicate it to her memory. River Gods. I'd always been horrified by the thought of river gods, their webbed skin, their breath of must and decay, their muscles quirky as eels. Fetid creatures were sure to live in the long tresses of beard that dangled from their mouths, glutted and soft with their dull monotony of swallowing. And to think of the bathing nymph, how the young flesh must recoil at their first touch before she is dragged down, that set my skin writhing. I was wrong. River gods are harmless creatures too awkward to walk on dry land without stumbling. And I'm going to finish with my wife Tanya sometimes complains that she has never appeared in any of my poems, and it's true. I don't really write poems that feature people directly, but this one does feature Mr. Shelby, our dog. So he does make an appearance. So apologies about this one. Light Rail, it's called. Pre-dawn. Bray stations screech and shunt. Morning is a wet nose and snuffle, 4 paws flopping to the floor for the first excursion. Outside, the street is a neon stage set, the first slow train unspooling its show reel across a bridge in a series of stills. The sitters sleep-stunned and solitary as anything from Hopper, to a soundtrack of rattling iambs. The track, the train, the track, the train, the pulse of a city waking. So once again, thanks to Doire and thanks everyone for listening. Thank you very much.
That was great, David. Thanks a million. It was great to hear the poems in Irish.
Thanks very much, Sean.
Okay.
I hope I did them justice.
Yeah, I hope so. Well, the people in Connemara can tell you that. I wouldn't be an expert. So we'll bring everybody on screen for the end. Hi, everybody. So I just happen to have a little glass of red wine here, which I'm going to raise as a toast to the launch of Riptide and Liffey Sequence. And thank you very much to Eleanor and Maurice for doing the honors. Okay, sláinte.
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 And here we go, the way out.